We're joined this week by Chief Government Whip Joel Fitzgibbon, Sky News contributor Chris Kenny, Peter Bentley from the McKell Institute and the Shadow Minister for Employment Participation and Childcare, Susan Lee. I want to turn to China. Paul Keating made some interesting comments in a speech this week, criticising both sides of politics essentially for following the United States too closely when it comes to foreign policy, saying we should be a bit more independent about this, and particularly when it comes to the rise of China. Joel Fitzgibbon, as a former Defence Minister, how do you view the rise of China? Should we be worried about it? Do you agree with Paul Keating?
Well, I recently said on another program that Paul's always right. But he and I have had many discussions on this issue, and we don't see quite eye to eye. Look, Asia's where the action is, and we, as Australians, we've got a very strong economic relationship with the East Asian countries in particular. We need a peaceful and stable Asia. And the best way of assuring a peaceful and stable Asia, in my view, is to have the US engaged as a balance of power. And now, I suppose you'd be concerned about us helping them or hosting them in some way and helping them engage in Asia if they were guilty of a policy of containment. But I've not seen any evidence that they are. Now, if you want to argue that they are guilty of a policy of containment, then, and you took that to the nth degree, then you'd surely be arguing that we should be withdrawing the partnerships that we already have. Now, would anyone be arguing that we close down Pine Gap or any of the joint facilities we have in this country? Of course we should not.
It's a fine line, though, isn't it, between US engagement in the region and containment of China? I mean, where does that line fall? Is it the deployment of more and more troops to here and the rest of the region?
Well, Marines doing joint exercises in the Northern Territory doesn't equate to containment, nor, in fact, is opening HMAS Sterling in Western Australia to more visits by US ships. I mean, the US is and will be a force for good in the Asian region. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And no one should come to any conclusion without checking the facts that somehow them strengthening their presence in the region somehow equates to containment. I just don't accept that it does.
Susan Lee, Tony Abbott was in China recently and also in the United States, where he did talk about the need for a peaceful rise of China, but for it also to play by the rules when it comes to some of the disputes in the South China Sea as well. What do you think, though? Is there an argument that we should be less hostage to the United States when it comes to our position on China?
Look, I think we have to recognise that we're part of this region, and I think we should see the opportunities that China provides us and not focus too much on the threats. And the opportunities are clear in tourism, in agriculture, in a lot of areas that we perhaps traditionally haven't seen China as a partner. That rise of the middle class, and I do see the opportunities in agriculture in terms of export of our food products as the demand for protein in the diet of Southeast Asia increases. There is a good story to be told, and obviously that links with our discussion paper on foreign investment to make sure that we put the mechanism of investment under proper scrutiny and keep it transparent and in the national interest.
Well, let's talk about that. This discussion paper on foreign policy does advocate tougher rules when it comes to foreign investment in agricultural land in particular. Explain to us, in your rural-based MP, why the need? What example can you give of where foreign investment has occurred in farmland that shouldn't have?
We're not saying it has occurred when it shouldn't have.
So
and
why the need to toughen the rules?
I would certainly not say that. Well, I would say that if you ask the question, as people have a right to do, how much of Australia's farmland or real estate is owned by foreigners, other interests, and we can't actually answer the question because the data is insufficient, then that's a problem. And if people hear that...
Because the Bureau of Statistics says it's 6%.
They do, but I don't think the data is broken up past that. I don't think it's very strong. Look, the reporting point is about $240 million. We're suggesting in our discussion paper that maybe that should be lowered to $15 million. It's just a reporting point. It's not about making people who might choose to invest jump through more hoops.
But just explain to me the argument why you need to do this.
Well, we need to know how much of Australian real estate and land is owned by foreign interests, and
you
where
can do that with the register
appropriate, who
that you're
those...
talking about. Why the need to lower the threshold?
Well, we have to keep an eye on what the trend might be. So I don't think there's a level for discomfort at the moment from what we're told. But I think over time we need to be clear about where points of pressure might lie. And if we talk about agriculture, then foreign interests owning agricultural land is fine up to a point. But I'd like to see some value add. The milling, the manufacturing, not just the primary produce being exported overseas for further processing there.
So you're talking about putting more strings on foreign investment to require production in Australia as well?
No, not strings, but where that production is lacking or declining, then you see a decline of the rural economic base, and I don't like to see that. But I'm trying to take this away from the xenophobic argument that we're being characterised with, which is totally not the case, and say that we all want to see the value adding of our primary produce, whether it be mining, whether it be agriculture, in Australia, and we should keep an eye on how that plays out over time.
Chris Kenny, this foreign investment position from the Coalition, do you think it is xenophobic or targeted at China in particular?
Well, I think they've got to be careful about it. I think it's emotional. I think there's a little bit of discontent in the bush about it, which pushed the Nationals buttons and has got Tony Abbott reacting. But I think in reality there's not a problem. And I think the government...
So you don't think there's a need to do this?
Well, I think I can see an argument for greater transparency only because it might assuage any concerns in the community. But I think you need to be very careful that you're sending out signals against foreign investment, and especially if it's targeted at one particular country, obviously China. So I think the opposition needs to be very, very careful with this one. And I can understand why they've sort of been... There's concern in the bush, they need to look at it. But you don't want to add any other conditions, extra conditions on Chinese investment.
Peter, do you acknowledge there is concern about this, particularly in rural areas? They're at the coalface of seeing what's happening with Australia's farmland. They are worried about more foreign ownership of our food production base.
Absolutely. There is concern and it's legitimate, but I think the solution lies in transparency. And there's a really interesting dynamic because what the Coalition is proposing, their discussion paper, a lot of it makes sense and is quite reasonable, with the exception of, I personally disagree with the lowering at the threshold. I think that's a bit low, but having national registers, having that transparency makes sense. But there's a real disconnect between what they're actually proposing and a lot of the comments. And some of that's come through the media and things like that as well. But we have to be
like the idea of a register of who owns what?
Absolutely. We should be transparent. But there's also a role for leadership in this, and I come from a regional community. I've seen farms in my area being purchased by foreign investors, Chinese investors, that have invested value added and are actually employing more people. So there's actually a very positive story to be told here, and I think both sides of politics actually have a role in that. And the interesting thing is, and I hope we're not seeing a breakdown of the consensus that we've had for the last 20 years. Hawke and Keating, Howard, Gillard Rudd all supported significant foreign investment. The Coalition policy in the late 80s for a period of time was to abolish the Foreign Investment Review Board. So
is that a fair point? Do both sides of politics have a responsibility to better explain the benefits of foreign investment?
I think we do. There's no breakdown in that consensus at all. And
but some of the comments from your side, you've got to admit.
Look, this is about reassuring people and about saying we've got tabs on it, everyone. What happens in the future, we'll be able to quantify and take policy action if we need to. But I reassure people by saying the investment that Australians have overseas is far greater than the investment that overseas has in Australia. And so it does underscore the point that we're a global community and we shouldn't be too anxious about this. So
Joel Fitzgibbon, what do you think's wrong with the Coalition's policy on this?
Well, it's a dog whistle. And Tony Abbott knows that, Joe Hockey knows that, and that's why they've been taking to it with a big fire hose. They've had to appease the Nats, and I feel for Susan because she's one of those Liberals that stole a National Party seat, so she's in the worst of both worlds. She's in the Liberal Party, who are more sensible than the Nats on this issue, but she represents a constituency which traditionally is a National Party area, so it must be hard for Susan. But look,
it's not as hard for me in my seat as it is for you in yours right now.
Peter hit the nail on the head. We've had a bipartisan consensus on this for a long, long time, and we're playing a very, very dangerous game here. But thankfully, Tony Abbott decided the best way to deal with it was to produce a discussion paper, and I bet you it doesn't go too much further than that.
What about this idea, though? And you know, Peter likes the idea too of a register, some transparency around who owns what.
I have no problem with that.
No problem with that?
But we've got to understand that whether the foreign investors are Chinese, American, or from the UK. They face the same planning laws in this country as anyone else. So this idea that somehow that Chinese are going to come and take our agricultural land and take all of that food away.
When we talk about state-owned enterprises, which the majority of Chinese companies
I think governments should be discerning when it comes to state-owned enterprises, and bodies such as the National Security Committee of the Cabinet, I've no doubt. In fact, I look at these things from time to time, and I don't think that's a secret. So we've already got mechanisms in place to ensure that Australia isn't disadvantaged. But the bottom line here is, David, we need foreign investment. And if Susan wants to do more in terms of value add in agriculture, the money's got to come from somewhere, and it's more likely to be coming from foreign investors.
Some of the most important value adding is in dairy, and that's absolutely reeling from the carbon tax. Let me tell you, you will have the explanation from dairy processors about the effect of the carbon tax on value adding in agriculture. No, I mean you can laugh all you like, but it's a real issue.
No, hang on, Susan. I'm not laughing about the impact of the carbon price on dairy alleged.
You're trivialising it.
I'm laughing at the fact that no matter what we debate in the public discourse these days, you manage to take it back to the carbon price, and people are starting to wake up to the game.
Chris,
I was just going to say on the two issues we discussed relating to China, both the foreign investment, particularly in agriculture issue, and the broader strategic issues that Joel talked about at the start. There's really very little between the parties. They're very nuanced debates, and they're actually quite important debates, I think, for the future of this country. So it's good to see them being raised and discussed in a pretty sober manner, but let's just sit back and watch politics get in the way and turn it into a frenzy. That's what I worry about.
You think this issue, whether it's our strategic positioning in relation to China, or perhaps more likely the trade issue, is going to become more political?
Well, I'm worried they are. I think the debate's been pretty sensible so far, and I think it's good because I think they are both quite crucial and fairly nuanced debates for this country to have. And I just wanted to point that out and perhaps issue that warning that we shouldn't be trying to play party politics over either of those issues.
And if we all spend as much time better educating the electorate about foreign investment and the benefits and where it's going and who's providing the investment, I think we'd all be better off.
Joel Fitzgibbon mentioned that your seat, Farry, you took from the Nats. These are so-called three-cornered contests where Libs go up against Nats. Just before we go to break, I just wanted to ask you what you think about what looks like a few more three-cornered contests at the next election. Seats like Hume, where Albie Schultz is leaving, Lyne, where Rob Oakeshott is going to be under challenge, and also Gilmore, Angry Anderson, flying the flag as a possible Nationals candidate. What do you think? Would he make a good candidate?
Would Angry make a good candidate? Well, I don't know. I've never met him. I wasn't a big fan, but...
he's got a great name for a carbon tax candidate.
He's a man with passion, and he's got something to say, and we want more people who have passion.
But more seriously, three-cornered contests, should they be sorted out before you actually end up with Libs and Nats fighting against each other?
I could never honestly endorse that position because it wasn't in my case. It was everyone have a go, and I'm quite comfortable with the idea that when a sitting member steps down, both coalition parties contest the seat. But I'm also on record as saying we actually shouldn't be two parties. I would much prefer to see the LNP experience spread to the rest of Australia. If the rural Liberals joined forces with the Nationals, imagine what a strong, powerful rural bloc we could be. Not necessarily a formal bloc, but we could really fight the fight for rural Australia. I'd love to see that.
Do you think that could happen in other states?
Well, it happened in Queensland, and I think that it's been successful, and I don't see why it couldn't happen elsewhere. But I'm also quite comfortable with the situation as it is. I get on well with my Nationals colleagues. We work closely together. We have a lot in common.
Chris, do you think that it could happen? I'm thinking particularly of Victoria, where I know there's a lot more animosity between Libs and Nats than perhaps other states.
Yes, but look at Queensland. You know, that's where there's been incredible animosity over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Now, it's still just bedding down, so I think it's too early.
Being in government, though.
Yeah, they are in government. It's too early to call it a long-term success. But I think as soon as that is bedded down, and it's pretty close to it now, the obvious extension is to take that nationally. Now, I think Liberal and National leaders will be very careful about talking about that publicly. symbolically, but it's logically where they should be aiming, and you could see it unfold over the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, we've segued into that area. We're going to take another break, though, and I want to talk about sport funding as well. The Olympics over the last couple of weeks have brought on the inevitable debate about whether we're pumping in too much money or not enough money to help our athletes. Stay with us.
You think technology is amazing? Well, if you want to see something really